Hello, everybody. I'm triple casting. Who knew? Um, I do have a guest as well, which is something I don't always get to do on Tuesdays. Actually, the last one we had was with Aaronstein and Jared Brennan, who you remember. I have Nickolas Means with me today. I have an intro. His PR people wanted me to read an intro, so don't hold off. Before we get started with that, because I want this to be a podcast episode, I'd like to thank really long number Hal for following us. I appreciate that, and Bonzo One DOS for following as well. So I appreciate that, and thank you all. So uh, anyway, uh, so we'd like to welcome Nickolas Means to the show. Nick is the VP of Engineering at SYM, an adaptive access tool built for developers. He's an engineering leader for more than a decade, focusing on helping teams build velocity through trust and autonomy. He's also a regular speaker at conferences around the world, teaching more effective software development practices through stories of real world engineering triumphs and more. His side gig, when he's not being the VP of engineering, is he's also the co host of Managing Up, a podcast with management tips, stories, and interviews to help navigate the challenges of managing creative and technical teams. Welcome, Nickolas Means, to the show.
Thanks so much, Brian. Such a pleasure to be here, man.
Right on, yeah. So if anybody wants to check out the podcast and stuff, Managing Up, there'll be a link to SimOps website and managingup.show, which is where the podcast can be found. You can also find all that in the show notes, and I will post it up into our chat here on Twitch for those of you who are kind enough to be joining us today. So, Nick, I read the intro, but how does maybe we could go into a bit more depth about your origin story. How did you get to become the VP of engineering for a company? Are you still in incubation stage, or are you like out there?
Yeah, so we
Um,
actually just publicly launched this week where anybody can go to simops.com and sign up for the tool. So yeah, still pretty early
okay,
days yet.
very cool. Okay, well, how does somebody become a VP of engineering? And you must have a varied experience here. So I'd love to hear a little bit of your background story.
So I like to joke that I'm the only software engineer that ever decided they liked the people side of engineering better than the technical side.
Nothing wrong with
Um,
that.
it's I was an engineer for a decade before I shifted into management and kind of got frustrated with some of the management that I had worked under. And really wanted to see if there was a better way to lead engineering teams. Wanted to try some of the theories. Brene Brown had just written, I guess it was her TED talk had just come out around the power of vulnerability, and wanted to see if there was a way to bring some of that kind of mindset to the software engineering world. And that's led me down this path of generative engineering leadership and building highly collaborative, highly autonomous organizations where I really focus on being more of a coach than telling folks what to do and helping folks figure out how to be more efficient and more effective at the things that they're working on.
Okay, excellent. Don't mind me. I actually was trying to find the power of vulnerability TED talk, so I found that there. It's in the chat for those of you. All right, so we're going to talk about a number of different things. We're going to draw upon your breadth and width of experience. We're going to go, up and down the T, if you will. I learned about that. I'm taking my Harvard Business Online courses, so I learned about
Nice.
leadership principles, and it's like you have a wide T and a broad T, and I was like, okay,
Yep.
that's fine. Um, so you've probably had to deal with quite a few incidents in your time. I didn't have a chance to look at your entire LinkedIn profile, but you being a VP of engineering, you've probably had to deal with a bunch of oh crap moments, or you're sitting down to Thanksgiving, and all of a sudden something's not running, or your pipeline's busted, or what have you. So, um, us in security, we talk about the blameless environment when we're dealing with incident response, and
Yeah.
um, how is working an incident from the development side different? I don't know how many security people you've worked with or incident response people, but from a development point of view, how is it different than dealing with the security side of things? I mean, what kind of actions does a development team have to deal with on an incident side?
I mean, it's interesting from the engineering side. Most of the incidents that I've dealt with or been a part of over my career have been more the system outage side of things versus the security breach. Although I've been part of a couple of security breaches as well. And I think in a perfect world, the mindset is the same. You're definitely going for that blameless environment. Usually, in the middle of the hot part of an incident, there's not time to get into like blame or finger pointing
Right.
aside from a random comment. Why the hell did we build it that way? Um, so from my perspective, a lot of it is the same. You're stepping into a situation with many unknowns, and you're trying to bring clarity to that situation. You're trying to narrow it down to what's actually going on, um, what's causing the incident at hand, and how do you make it okay again.
Right.
So like that's the hot part of the incident. That's when you're trying to get the system working again, and then is when you really get into the danger zone for blame after you get the initial crisis handled and you're starting to figure out why did this happen? How do we
Right.
keep it from happening again?
Right. So that in I don't in the security parlance, for those of you who are watching the show, we call it the lessons learned, or
Mhm.
how do we learn from this process? How do we make sure that it doesn't happen again? Lady P had a good point. There's plenty of time for blame when the lawyers get involved later on, if it's a lawyer thing that's required. But um, yeah, I agree with you. Trying to finger point in the middle of when you're trying to get back to your RTOs and your RPOs are already out the door, and
Yep.
you're trying to just get the lights back on, and stopping to blame people who get defensive or whatever. It's just not a good environment to do that in. And I have not, I don't know if I consider it lucky, but I have been in infosec for about 20 years and have not had to deal with a major incident like that. um, is there like a stages of grief for the engineering teams? It's like, oh my God, my hair is on fire. And then there's denial. And then there's, like acceptance. And then, we, just move on. I mean, what for you and working with those teams, do you see that kind of stage where it's like, oh no, this isn't really an issue. Oh, now it is an issue. Okay. And now, hair's on fire.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think blameless culture doesn't just happen. It's a thing that you have to start setting up before an incident ever happens. And so
Mm,
if you don't build that mentality towards learning in a team from the moment that you become part of that team, the moment you start working with them, then when an incident happens, it devolves really quickly, or it can devolve really quickly into finger pointing and blame and all that. Um, so the question you asked is there stages of grief? Well, there can be. If you operate in a high blame culture and an incident happens, the initial instinctual response of anybody is going to be fear of what if I caused this? What if
right.
this causes me to lose my job? So that's why it's so important to build that culture of learning so that you can short circuit some of that. I don't think you can ever short circuit all of it because it's just such a part of human nature.
Right.
Um, but the more safety that people feel during an incident, the quicker you can come to realization of what actually happened and get to the bottom of it. Especially if somebody's taken an action that caused the situation to get into that state. I mean, the canonical example is somebody dropping the production database, right?
Right.
And we joke about it because it's a thing that seems to happen with alarming frequency. Data gets deleted when it shouldn't get deleted. Um, and it's also a canonical example because it almost always is an individual failure if you want it to be.
Right.
But if you zoom out to take a systems mindset on it, it's never an individual failure because the system both let that individual and made it make sense for that individual to take that action.
Right. Yeah. Not to dovetail into recent stories, but the FAA outage that happened because of the NOTAMs issue.
Mhm.
I was watching TV, and they said, well, the outage happened during the maintenance window about 3 in the morning, and apparently an engineer overwrote a configuration file or something like that. And I was like, how many people have been there? And it's
Yep.
like, my first thought was, wow, I hope that engineer still has a job and, is
Yeah.
going to have a hell of a story in a few years when, somebody's like, because those are the people that are like, hey, been there, done that. You can't possibly screw it up any worse. I've been here. Let me tell you the story about the time I did blah. And it builds. I don't want to say it builds a camaraderie, but it builds like a, hey, I've been in a high stress situation, and this is how I handled it, and I can move on from that and learn and teach other people the same issue. Um,
Yeah.
and the blameless culture, though, I think you're right. It does extend beyond the IR. You need to have a blameless environment, a blameless culture, no matter if it's an incident response or if it's, why did you miss this deadline, or why did
Yeah.
the team miss this deadline? It's a we thing,
Right.
and yeah, I mean, obviously, maybe when they're talking to the VP of engineering about why they missed the deadline, there's a different messaging there than inside the team. But um, yeah, I think the blameless culture needs to extend beyond just incidences. But yeah, it's that's kind of interesting to understand. Do you ever? I mean, what do your after action reports look like? You mentioned, doing those, or lessons learned or what have you.
Yeah.
Um, what does it look like for you, and what does it look like for your team? Do you give them the opportunity to openly understand what's going on in a blameless environment?
We do our best to try to keep them as factual as possible. I actually learned a lot from watching Amy Toby run after incident reviews at GitHub. She was incredible at spotting things that even hinted of blame and very kindly but very firmly steering people completely the opposite direction when one of those things would start to come up in the conversation. So I've tried to bring some of that spirit with me when I help lead these. Anymore, I don't lead them very often though. I'm
Mm,
usually there. I'm usually observing. But our team takes turns leading after incident reviews. And again, the goal is capture things as factually as possible. What's the timeline? Who took what action when? What things what things contributed to that action? What was the state of the system at that point? And what remediations do we need to make? What things do we need to change about the system to keep this kind of thing from happening again? But
right.
it's always very focused on, like you said earlier, learning, and that's the whole goal. And you have to go into it with that mindset where we're approaching this thing that happened with curiosity. We're not trying to figure out who to point a finger at. We're trying to just inquire about what actually happened in the situation and how can we make it not make sense, or how can we make the system be more resilient in the face of something like this in the future.
Right. So what you're doing there with timelines and everything sounded very much like, you're doing an investigation or digital, when you're doing digital forensics or something, you have to, write down how the timeline went and everything.
Hmm?
Do you ever find that maybe the witness issue, where it's like somebody remembers something differently than others, is that part of, digging down to where the facts are? It's like, oh well, I saw it from this angle. Well, I saw it from this angle, and then, well, I saw it from over here. So, everyone has a kernel of truth. So
Yeah.
um, do you find you have to interview, or almost interview people Columbo like, to figure out who done it, or how it happened, not who done it, but how did it happen?
So the interesting thing about doing these in the context of a distributed organization, which is the only way I've ever done them, I've only ever led engineering in distributed organizations,
Right.
is you almost always have a text record of what happened because there's always an incident review channel. It may become a call at some point. People hop on a synchronous Zoom call, but generally there's still information getting recorded out to Slack, someone capturing notes, someone capturing a timeline as things happen, so that you have a version of events to look back on.
Mm.
Um,
Okay. So when in the after actions for incidents, how do you handle the follow on work? There are things that come up. I mean, do you treat those in the same way that you would treat like regular work? Like, I don't know if y'all do sprints, or if you do, kind of agile methodologies used, but does your do you consider that to be a higher priority because it was part of an incident, or do you just, consider it like normal work, and we're just gonna get back up to, this bar, and then any of the additional work that's needed is just funneled in as part of another sprint?
I think it depends on the severity of the things that we identify. It's no different than when, say, a vulnerability report rolls in. If it's a critical security vulnerability for one of your dependencies, you're probably going to drop everything and update that dependency right there so that you
Sure.
can you can resolve the vulnerability in your system. If looking at it, it's a thing that's likely to cause another incident, then will generally that'll skip the line. It'll jump ahead of all of our engineering work. If it's something that is not as severe, maybe it'll go on the backlog and we'll do it in a cycle or two. And if it's something that's sort of a nice to have, it would be nice if we have an incident like this in the future, but it's not something that really hindered us or made it harder for us to resolve it. That might get thrown into continuous improvement and never get done. It might never get prioritized. So I think it's really case by case.
Okay. That's good. For those of you watching and listening, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat on your YouTube or LinkedIn or Twitch, and we'll get them answered as in the order they are which if they are received. So, um, yeah. So we have a few topics here, and I think some of them kind of blend into one another, which is
Yeah.
kind of great. So we're talking about incidents. We're talking about timelines. A lot of times you're building those timelines, and I'm not exactly sure how much SimOps your organization does in terms for compliance. But if there was something, I'm flashing back to PCI or what have you. If there's an incident there that might result in a loss of that, where you'd be collecting timelines and collecting incident response information. Uh, Not to derail too much, but Lady P says, "Is that a Nixie clock on the shelf?"
It is. Good eye.
There you go, Lady P. She's one of our moderators here. Excellent,
Nice.
excellent eye, Lady P. Bully. Yeah, good job for you. So one of the requirements for compliance, is a lot of people deal with compliance in because it's one of those necessary evils to do business, and
Yeah.
I'm not exactly so. A lot of my compliance has been from the security side. So it's like, yeah, hey, compliance is great, but it's here on the security bar, and we would kind of like to be here. And it's
Right.
trying to get them compliance folks up to this point is kind of painful. Um, so what kind of compliance requirements does your team have to deal with? Or in your experience, I'm thinking maybe SOX compliance or something like that, some kind of program of record kind of stuff. But are those what kind of compliance issues does your team deal with that bogs down your development pipelines?
Yeah. So we're at SIM, we're SOC 2 Type 2. So we do all of the auditing and data collection for SOC 2. I've led a couple of health tech startups before as well, though. So I've
Mm,
been in HIPAA scope organizations. It's all sort of the same, right? Like you get a rule book of things that you have to do, and you have to find ways to do those things without slowing the team down, without making it where there's a bunch of gates that they have to go through in the course of their everyday doing business.
okay,
Um, so yeah, for us, it because we are building a tool that lets you automate access to things like production environments. It was pretty important to us to get the SOC 2 Type 2 early,
hmm
um, because that's the thing that we're asked for.
right,
Potential customers will ask to see that. They'll ask to see pen test reports um, before they'll allow us within 100 miles of their production systems, and they should.
right,
It's a nice badge of confidence to be able to hand somebody. Um, but SOC 2 is hard in that there's a bunch of things that you have to set up, a bunch of processes you have to put in place, and then you have to follow them. You get audited to see, did you made all these rules, did you actually follow them? Um,
right.
so that's a
Um,
lot of what we've dealt with in that regard.
yeah. So th- I see a lot of so Twitchkins asked, how much detail in that pen test report do you share? Yeah. Well, I mean, the SOC 2 Type 2, has a rock, if you will, or like not a rock, but it has an artifact that you can give them. I don't think you necessarily want to be sharing that kind of detail in the pen test, but I'll let Nick weigh in on that. There is a pen test that's required. I just don't know how much pen testing is actually required for a SOC 2 Type 2.
Yeah, I mean it's sort of a high level. It's scan plus some targeted probing here and there. We've done some additional pen testing outside of SOC 2, like you were talking about before. That we want the bar to be here, and the compliance regime requires you to be here.
Mm,
Um, so it's pretty easy to share the results of the automated scan type stuff, and we will share that with selected customers under NDA. Um,
okay. Okay.
but like you said, it's the SOC 2 Type 2 pen test report that we're sharing. So it's not the targeted. We think we might be vulnerable in this way. Please find out if we are.
Right. Right. So you're a you're not completely a startup. You said everything went live, and you're taking users, but
Mhm.
at some point your organization realized it needed to have security people or compliance people. And my first question is, which one did you hire first, a compliance person or a security person? And one, I'd love to see the job description that y'all wrote for your security person or your compliance person, because my thinking is, and as I've seen it with a lot of startups, it's like must have 500 years of experience in Kubernetes and 3 million years of experience with Windows and what have you. I was just trying to. So okay, let me the first question: who did you hire first, a compliance person or a security person?
So the compliance person is actually the only hire that we have made because we've focused on hiring engineers that have security abilities as well.
I'm sorry, I'm a bit on the shocked side here. Is that such a thing? Did you find so many unicorns?
There is such a thing. They're very hard to find, um, but they are out there, and when you're building a product like the one that we're building, they are a little bit more attracted to that type of work where they can kind of straddle both sides of the fence, keep doing the development side of their career and get to exercise their security chops a little bit as well.
Okay. I got to tell you, I'm a little worried now because if um, I so give you a little background. I was on Twitter the other day, and there's a PhD student. I won't mention the person's name because they were complaining that they bought a computer, or they were asking for a computer from their TA, and it asked, the university was going to intercept the laptop and put things like MDM on it and CrowdStrike, and the more I talked with this person and a couple of other folks on there who are developers in things, it was obvious that these people lived in academia for too long. And it was like, oh, well, we want everything open and we don't want security, we don't want spyware on our system. And I was like, look, you don't know what endpoint security is. It's been around for a while. It needs to be on your box.
Yep.
Education security is god awful. And I was like, look, you've got a CS degree and you're gonna go out into the world where you're gonna have to have this stuff on your computer. Um, and I was like, you know, I I made the joke in our Discord. I was like, I'm gonna blast this VP of engineering because developers don't know what the hell security is, and then you go ahead and just shock the hell out of me right here with this, hiring people with security background. And I'm like, damn it. Um, so that's a culture thing too, right? You breed the blameless culture, you breed the security culture
Yep.
because um and and is there a specific, I don't know, how do you hire for a developer that knows security? And I'm gonna refrain from using quotey fingers there. How do you hire a develop? What are some of the questions you ask a developer about security? I mean, I don't know a lot about SIMOps, so I mean there must be some kind of background here on securing whatever it is, and so please enlighten me on what in hiring a developer who knows security looks like.
Um, it starts by looking at somebody's resume, at the profile, at the things that they've worked on before. Um,
Okay.
Finding somebody that has a breadth of experience. I'm not sure anybody in our team has ever had the title security engineer, but almost all of them have a bullet point or more in their resume of having focused on security or having solved some security problem in the software that they've been working on. Um,
Okay.
so then combining that with targeted pen testing on things that we think we might be vulnerable on, and targeted education, people on the team learning about security, learning about ways in which a system might be vulnerable, and paying attention to those things as we build the software. Like you said, it's a culture thing. And
Right.
so hiring people that have some background, are broadly curious about that, and are willing to invest time in it, and then allowing time on the backlog for them to do that investment, um, might be a more effective way to operate than going out and hiring a security person. Because if you hire a security person in any given startup and you're still trying to go as fast as you possibly can and get software out the door as fast as you possibly can, you're not going to get very good results out of that. So I think it's
Right.
actually probably in the earlier stages of a business more important to build that time into your development life cycle than it is to go out and make that first targeted hire necessarily.
Okay. So let me see if I can. How did how did y- how did you and your organization figure out this thing? Because I mean, I don't know if it's if it's the startup mentality of get to market, get to market, get to market, but at some point somebody in your org or you specifically said, hey, we really need to have security. Or either it comes from personal experience, where it's hey, those security people, they aren't all that bad. We probably should look at them.
Yeah.
You know, how did that get bred into your organization, and make it a priority? Because most people think startup, they think get to market. We'll figure out the security stuff later, or we'll
Yeah.
bolt it on, as people like to say. So how did who decided that that was the way y'all were going to do this in your business charter or what have you?
So the founders had very much set that direction before I ever joined.
Ah,
The
okay.
two of our founders have worn the VPE and CTO hat before.
Oh,
So it's definitely not their first technical rodeo. And then, one of the reasons that they brought me on as VP of engineering is because I have had some experience in health tech startups. And then most recently I was at GitHub. So I've been in some high security organizations and have some opinion on the right way to do this stuff. That came up a bunch in my interview process.
right. Okay.
So, and I should rewind a little bit. I said the first person we hired was a compliance person. That's not entirely fair. He brings a lot of security background to the table as well.
Okay.
And we lean on him in a consultative capacity pretty often.
Oh, very
If
nice.
there's something that we want to know, are we threat modeling this accurately? Are we thinking about the right ways this might be vulnerable? Are there any other things that you think that we're not thinking about that we should be? He's an incredibly helpful sounding board in those situations.
Nice. Yeah, I didn't know if it was a security product management type role, or if it was something like that. Um, so Wh- how did your organization, or in the past, when you were having to deal with compliance things, obviously, there could be, SOC come out with a new version of it next week that causes a lot of new work for your organization.
Yeah.
Obviously, you're probably getting some, heads up from your, compliance person about that. um how do you keep your velocity when you're doing releases? Do you, when you're looking at, hey, there's a new SOC version coming out that could be these things. How do you keep the compliance from not being an impediment, or security in this case from not being an impediment to releasing your software
I mean, I think one of
services?
the things I would say is we automate as much of it as we can, as much of the data collection, as much of the controls as we can. It's in fact, that's one of the reasons we architected SYM the way that we did. It's an adaptive access tool, but part of the design philosophy is those access workflows are implemented in Terraform. And the reason for that is so the engineering teams that are using those access workflows can PR against them and can have a voice in some of the security controls that are in place in their organization. Um, so that's been a key focus of mine. I remember one fight early in my career around affirmative approval to deploy a release. And the compliance person we were working with inside of a large organization really wanted someone affirmatively signing off on every release of the software that got deployed. And we were trying to move towards continuous deployment.
Right.
And I mean, it's
Right.
pretty easy to see how those gears would grind. And we finally came to a piece around PR approvals and automated testing being enough of an affirmative control to satisfy that requirement in the auditor's eye. But it took a lot of work to get to that agreement, that was actually much more effective than having our CTO click a button saying that we should deploy that software, because the people approving the PR, the people looking at the automated test results, had a whole lot more context on the safety of that release than the CTO ever could.
Right.
But
Yeah.
it took a long time to build that understanding.
Yeah, plus, I'm sure the auditor. Well, I don't say I want to say I'm sure, but the auditor doesn't understand the velocity. Doesn't understand the bits in the background. There's a lot of folks, especially dealing with security and compliance. They try to drown the auditor in paper, and
Yep.
I don't know if they don't want to take the time to help the auditor understand their business process. They'll just, print up a ream of documents and go, hey, you go over here into sub basement B and read these
Yeah.
documents. And of course, you have the auditors like, well, they just gave us 500 pieces of paper. That must mean that they're good. Check, that kind of thing.
Yep.
Um, how much, I mean, you said you had to work with your auditor. I mean, how did it get contentious? I mean, how did it did was it they wanted the spirit of the you wanted the spirit of the law, not the letter of the law, and they were, I mean, did you have to find a different auditor? I mean, how did that work when you interviewed them? It's like, hey, we do specific things here. At the time, I remember having to work with an auditor that didn't understand the cloud, and
Yeah.
understanding, hey, we use Docker and stuff, and they're like, I can't spell Docker. So, um, what did it look like for you having to get an auditor who understood you?
So this was, like you said, this is back in those early days when cloud was still new. And I was at a startup that was incubated inside of a larger company. And so
Mm.
we didn't really have a lot of choice in auditor. So yeah, it did get contentious there for a while. Um, until we sort of brought them around to our way of seeing the world. And it just took a lot of peacemaking style conversations, a lot of I see your concerns, they are valid concerns. The thing that this control is trying to do is a valid thing to do. We value this particular kind of security. Here is how we are meeting it, and we think that that is a standard that is better than what is laid out in the letter of this particular requirement.
Mm.
Um, and over time, we were able to win them over to that way of thinking, but it did take a lot of conversations.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I yeah, I guess once you've got them over on your side, then it's all good. Yeah. Let me see. Um, so I've got a couple of other items here about not just compliance, but like how you do you mentioned automating a lot of things. I know some of the new hotness is now releasing dependencies for software that has non-friendly licenses. I don't know how much open source you have to deal with. Everybody deals with it. So I mean,
Yeah,
but if you get a dependency that, all of a sudden, you've got, all this nice BSD and MIT licensed stuff, or, and then you've got a GPLv3 stuck in there
right.
somewhere. And it's like, I'm trying to give this application with all of this open source software to my customer. And it's like, oh, now we have a non-friendly license. Um, you know, are you is that something that your team has to deal with on a regular basis, or is that do you do audits like that?
Again, I think it goes down to automating and using automated tools. This is something that is somewhat automatable. I won't say 100% because there's definitely libraries out there whose license terms are pretty murky.
Mm.
But it's pretty easy to set up an automated scanning tool that if somebody adds an MIT license or anything like that, that it just allows it through, and there's not a lot of contention around that. I think the key is you have to shift the conversation earlier in the development life cycle so that you have a good idea of what licenses you're okay with, what licenses you want to talk about, and see if you can find alternatives to, and then set the tooling up to do that. Set the tooling up to flag the ones that you care about. And there's a
Right,
bunch of different options for tooling out there that'll help scan for licenses now. And it's the same for vulnerabilities, right?
right,
Dependabot makes a lot of noise. It makes less than it did. Um, but you still have to decide how to react to those things. Are we going to merge a Dependabot PR the second it comes in? Or are we only going to do that for critical vulnerabilities? What is our risk tolerance with dependency updates from a security perspective? When do we risk breaking the system because a new dependency breaks the system, but it had a security vulnerability that it solved? Versus when do we want to be a little bit more slow in rolling those things out and make sure they don't break the system? Is there a security vulnerability level that's critical enough for us to let one of those vulnerability patches kind of jump the line?
right, right. Yeah, that makes sense. I'm sure that there are organizations out there that are still trying to solve that problem. And they're not even aware of the licensing issues in some
Yeah,
cases. I know that when I've worked at places in the past that didn't think about that, and we
right.
would push things out like that. But yeah, so I think you almost got onto the next topic. We talked about shifting left.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this one.
um, so the first time I heard shifting left, it was because, oh, security people can't speak developer, and obviously you appear not to have that problem. You just got unicorns and fluffy rainbows and shit all up in your organization there.
I got very lucky with the humans I get to work with.
So I've heard shifting left for about a decade now,
Yep.
and Um, I it's it's a nice idea, and the
Hmm.
problem that I have with it is everybody expects security to be the one doing what is necessary to shift as left as possible. The problem that I've seen is development teams, and not yours specifically, don't want to make room at the adult table for the security folk to
Yeah.
show up and say, "Hey, here's a big pile of poo that we're going to drop on you and drop and cause your engineering velocity to grind to a halt."
Yeah.
And some of it is development's fault. Security does have more than 25% or 50% of the blame in this, because some of us have to work with the development teams, but is shifting left something that is it a fallacy? Should we get rid of it in terms of a better I'm sure marketing people have a better word ready for it, but has shifting left failed, or is it just that development teams have outgrown us and have done like what y'all did and learned how to do security in our stead?
I mean, so first of all, I wouldn't say we've learned to do security in your stead. I think there is absolutely a ton of value in having seasoned security professionals part of any engineering team. We're lucky enough to not need a full-time person doing that yet, but we will at some point, and we won't hesitate to make that hire when our development velocity, when we're pushing enough software out that we need somebody full-time.
Cool.
Um, as far as shifting left, I don't think it's a fallacy, and I don't think it's a bad ambition at all. I just think that it's been used to mean so many different things in the marketplace that it's kind of hard to even figure out what somebody means when they say it at this point.
Right.
Um, it's got the same problem that DevOps does, right? Startups started adopting DevOps, and that just meant the engineering team is responsible for setting up the production environment.
Right.
Um, and it's a lot of times it means responsibility without support, and I think that's part of the thing that's given it a bit of a rough time getting adopted by engineering teams, because okay, we're going to shift left, we're going to give you all these tools, we're going to expect you to deal with the output of all these tools, and not give you a lot of support around those things, not have somebody available to answer questions about them, help you understand what it's saying if it's getting into security territory that you're not well versed in, that you haven't seen before. um, it's one thing that engineers won't put up with for very long is gatekeeping, things that
Right.
slow them down. It's kind of like TSA at the airport, right? Like you mentioned that sometimes security gets a bad rap. Um, I don't think you'll find many developers on the planet who will tell you that they don't value security. Every engineer is going to tell you they value security, but they're going to be quick to point at individual implementations of security programs and poke holes at them.
Right. Right.
And I
And
think this is part of what plagues shift left.
right, right. And like you said, you've got, if security is asking your dev team to make sure that they sign everything, or, you have to, move away from your normal workflow to come over here and go to our antiquated, security, UI
Yeah,
instrumentation panel to run a scan or something, instead of, having it automated through your pipeline, or to call an API to be able to
yeah.
do whatever. Some of our tools can be clunky in that respect. Yeah. Um, yeah. So
Eh,
I've tried to explain the shift left as the cheaper option. My wife actually has had made the phrase to me. It's like you can fix it as far to the left, when you can afford to, take
mhm.
the time to do so. Once you're here, you have to make the time to do
Right,
so. So shifting left for me is more of a time and an investment kind of thing. It's like you can fix it, not necessarily when it's a small issue.
right,
Fix it when you have the time, not when you know, don't have the time.
right.
But yeah.
And again,
uh,
I think it gets into sort of that time philosophy, right? Companies are notorious for running engineering teams as close to 100% capacity as they can get them to run, to
right.
get as much software delivered as fast as they can deliver it. And that's not an environment that shift left is ever going to be successful in, because
Mm,
those noisy alerts that pop up from the security tools, aren't something in that team's mind that are trying to make the product better, because that's not how they're incentivized. They're incentivized to get software shipped out the door as quickly as they can.
Right.
When your incentives shift to something that's more holistic, where you're trying to build a good product that meets the needs of users and does it in a secure way, when everybody on the team is bought into the value of that all the way up to the top, then Chef Left becomes more tenable, and you get a more collaborative environment where engineering and security can work together to make sure that the right things are getting alerted on early in the dev process. And it's not noise. You give the engineers some agency over the tooling and some feedback mechanism over the tooling, so that they can reduce the noise and get more signal out of the tool, so they know when there's something that they need to react to.
Mm. Yeah, that's interesting. That because the other thing that I find a lot of security people, and I'm gonna, I'm 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 going to be black sheep here because what I'm going to say is going to make me very unpopular for some folks is we don't want to lose control of our little sandbox, if you will, and letting people do our job in some cases makes us security people feel bad. And if a developer can do that, or if a developer can use our tool, and like when Mr. Betcher, our podcast friend, and I were teaching developers how to use Burp Suite.
Hmm.
And one, it was like, that's how long ago this was. It was like they had no idea that it was possible to intercept web proxy or web
Hmm.
requests or what have you. And you show them burp, and it's like the thus spake Zarathustra, oh, that kind of thing, monkey touch monolith moment.
Yep.
And there's some folks out there that, and I think that's where we get our silos from. It's like we're afraid of giving up the control, or we're afraid of I don't know, imparting the knowledge to other folks, because once we do that, what do we have? What
Yeah.
value do we bring to the organization?
Hmm.
If we teach them how to do their code scans themselves, what do? We have less time in the day to do code scans, and somebody's going to wonder what we're doing. Um, I, I I think that goes to the third point where I'm like, is there a playbook for building more efficient dev and security teams? And I is it as simple as cross training? Is it as simple as we go back to the blameless culture, but should there be a culture of cross training, or helping people understand where and how their job fits in the environment, and what value they bring? Is that lost on security and development people, or um
I mean, I think there has to be, right? I think, you know, as a developer, I have absolutely worked with security people that didn't understand the software development lifecycle and what we were trying to do and the business pressures that we were under. They only understood the security side of the business and were purely in that gatekeeping mentality. That taught me a lot about what I didn't want in the interaction between security and engineering, because we actively tried to work around that individual and tried to avoid getting their attention, because every time we got their attention, it slowed us down, and it was a pain in the butt to convince them that what we were doing, we knew what we were doing, and it was safe. On the other hand, I've worked with some incredibly collaborative security people who would hop in at the very start of an idea and help threat model it, help figure out, okay, here are the
mm,
3 things you actually need to pay attention to, and here are the 10 that are on your mind that you can ignore. These are things that are likely not threats to this feature, or that are handled by other parts of our system. So you don't need to pay attention to them. If you just do these 3 things, then the feature that you're shipping is going to be safe enough to meet our standards. Um, and it's over time. We talk about cross training, but I don't think you can sit engineers down and make them sit through a security presentation and expect that to have the outcome that you want it to have.
right.
I really think that cross training has to come through breaking down silos and collaboration, and having security people work with your engineering team and talk with them, and help them understand how they look at a new feature through a security lens, and teach
Right.
engineers to have more and more and more of that as they build features out. Um, the challenge is exactly what you say, though. It requires some ability to put down ego, and not need to have control of those tools. The same as good management requires putting down ego, and not micromanaging everything that your team does. Um,
Right.
And it's a challenge because you get into that mindset where you're purely facilitating, you're purely coaching and helping people understand and helping people build more effective security practices. And you can look at the outcome of the software that the organization creates and you can see that it's secure. You can see the outcome of that process. But if I look at Brian, the security professional in that situation, what direct output do you have to point at to go, this is the work that I did? So it
Right.
really, for it to be successful, you have to move into more of a results oriented mindset where you see the security of the organization, you see the security of the software that's being shipped, the consideration that it's getting in the development life cycle. And that's what you incentivize. That's how you judge the effectiveness of the security people in your organization. Is, are they helping us ship more secure software versus are they completing 10 scans a week of our software and finding new vulnerabilities every week?
Right. Yeah. Um, yeah. You talked about the threat modeling and getting out ahead of various items. That's a shifting left too, right? Making sure. I don't know if y'all have PDP process or like where you're putting out new product or something like that. If you have a beginning product stage where you're trying to form business requirements and in the PMP world that I took, you do like project charters and things like that.
Yep.
Do you have sections in there where hey, we should be asking the security people about these things? I don't know if that happens everywhere, and I don't know if it's the product people just gloss over that in other companies, but I'd be interested in understanding how your team does new product initiatives in many cases. What does that look like for you bringing in security or bringing in developer types?
Yeah, so I'm glad you mentioned product people because that is a persona that we should absolutely talk about in this situation. I'm lucky to work with a product partner that is very attuned to security risks and is attuned to helping us build a secure product. And he tends to be the one that writes the initial product requirements as we're thinking about what problem we want to solve, and it's always describing it in terms of a problem. Then
Right.
we hand it off to the engineering team to think about, okay, how would we actually implement this? And there's a lot of times when my product partner will flag, here are the security things that I'm worried about in this feature.
Hmm.
And if he hasn't, then as we get into it and as we do the brief review before we put the feature into development, often it's somebody on the engineering team that will pipe up and go, hey, I'm worried about this thing. Should we ask our security person about this? And then we will and get their input on the
Nice.
feature. So it's not necessarily a mandatory review step that happens on every feature that we release, but it's something that everybody in the organization, because we're attuned to security, because we have people that want to pay attention to that stuff, and because we incentivize it,
Right.
um, then we get that outcome where it's not something that has to be a mandatory step.
Right. Yeah. So I do a little bit of IoT and IoT security, and there's devices that my organization wants to put out that you know I'm very acutely aware of what's going on in the news. So
Hmm.
things like air tags, great idea, except now they're used for stalking.
Yep.
And then it's like I send these email or these alerts from like the Register or the Verge or whatever. I'm like, hey, look, here's an IoT device, something to think about when you're going and developing these things. And like, oh my god, I can't believe that's a thing.
Yeah.
And so I think your product person. I apologize for thinking he might just gloss over things, but it's you know, it really you have to understand not just the problem space, but the attacker space in that,
Yep.
and that you have to think about, well, hey, I'd like a levitating toilet seat, but what would happen if it levitated away when I was trying to sit on it or something like
Right.
that? Or, what would a bad guy do with my levitating toilet seat?
Yep.
Even asking a simple question like that was like, well, and especially when you get somebody who's like, well, why would they want to do? Yes, they will do that because why would they want to do that? That's stupid. No,
Right.
they will
Because
do
they
that.
could.
That's I can because I can.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's good to hear that there's a holistic effort. And do you have any examples of like product people at other jobs, without naming names, that were like they just didn't get it, or you had to kind of, hey, you should go talk to this security person, or hey, what about this news article? I mean, what does it look like when they don't understand?
Yeah, I mean, there's even a higher plane of enlightenment to talk about here, and that's the product person that doesn't understand engineering velocity at all. They just wanted their feature yesterday.
Oh, yes.
And so, they don't care about the human toil that it takes to actually build the software. They don't care about the feedback that the engineering team has on the feature that they're proposing, let alone any security concerns about the particular feature.
Right.
So I think there's a spectrum that product people fall on. The best ones really care about engineers and understand that taking care of the engineers and collaborating with the engineers, breaking down that silo between product and engineering is the way to ship good product faster. And,
Right.
and those are the ones that either will already be thinking about security sort of natively or will be very amenable to the conversation when the engineering manager or the team bring it up.
Mm, very nice. Yeah. Yeah. I don't like using the word holistic, but it sounds like everyone has to understand some part of security to make this work.
I
And
mean, we've been saying it for years, right? It's so hard to achieve that I think it feels like a pipe dream to most of us that have ever spent any time caring about security.
right.
Because it's
Right.
so hard to get an organization to care about it. You see this in breaches all the time where we've incentivized teams to go as fast as they can, and then we're surprised when a breach happens.
Right.
Um, but we didn't give anybody time to do anything that would have prevented the breach in the first place.
Right. So, um, I'm not. I don't want to shift gears here, but there are security conferences and there are development conferences. I don't know. There's industry conferences as well. RSA for security folks. You have PyCon and for those for development conferences. Um, I don't go to the kind of conferences that your development team or your teams would go to necessarily. It's something I've wanted to branch out and do, but um, I've argued that security conferences are pretty much an echo chamber. It's like, hey, everybody should be secure. Yes, we totally agree with you. And then it's like we go back and the developers are like, I didn't go to that conference. I didn't get that message. Or I'm the manager and I just saw this in CIO monthly. What about the zero trust thing? And it's like when you go to conferences that are not security conferences, are security talks included, or do developers talk about security, or people in your industry, do they how is security um voiced there or not voiced at all in that respect, or do you ever go, well, hey, what about this, have you thought about security? Oh no, we don't worry about security, that's OPP, that's other people's problems. How does it look like for you in your industry and when you go to conferences or trade shows or what have you?
So it's interesting. I've spent most of my career in the Ruby and then the Python language spaces. And I think Ruby and Python are interesting examples here because they do tend to be more human focused languages. They tend to be focused on being languages that are easy for people to write good software. And that's a first class consideration with everything that they roll into the language. And that yields communities that are more holistically minded, that are more open to things like a talk on security at a Ruby developer conference. That's absolutely a thing that I've seen multiple times at RubyConf and RailsConf. Now, it's not as in depth as something that you would see at a security conference. You're not going to see somebody probably get on stage and demonstrate a vulnerability live on stage.
Right.
Um, but you will hear somebody do 101, even 102 level kind of security information with regard to building things in popular frameworks in those languages. That's not uncommon to see at all.
Nice. Okay. Yeah, it's one of those things. It's like I want to go to one of those conferences, but I don't know anybody there, and it'd be like, it'd be like spot the Fed, but it's spot the security guy,
Yep.
and it'd be like I don't know what I don't know. Security conferences, we have a lot of people who know one another on Twitter or what have you, and it's like, hey, I'm going to be here. Hey, hang out, whatever. I'm assuming that there's similar clicks in the Ruby and the Python areas, but yeah, uh, I was just trying to get a better understanding, and maybe for the folks in security, there are opportunities and tracks
Absolutely.
for security talks.
Yeah. Look for CFPs and propose things. I think a well crafted proposal that aimed at helping an average Python developer building an app in Django or an average Ruby developer building an app in Rails understand how to think like somebody that's malicious. What are the first things you would try to break in one of these apps? That kind of talk would be very well received. Just
Okay,
what are the basic things that you need to know to build a secure application?
nice. Okay. Um, Oh my. Okay. Well, I'm looking at my timer and I'm like, ah, where has the hour gone?
We've been talking for a bit now.
I know, right? When you're having fun, it just flies by. So, I do have one other thing, and it's kind of a little peccadillo that I have that I've had to been dealing with. My wife tells me that she's been managing up for years. So, um, I wrote this down, and I'll read it like this way: managing up, because you have a podcast about management tips, stories, and interviews to navigate these things. Um, in my experience, and I will say that I'll preface this by saying, in my experience, security is often asked to do a lot of things.
Hmm.
Often to be the single threaded owner. I learned that term the other day from somebody who works at a FANG. A single threaded owner is the person who ultimately owns the thing. But
Hmm.
unfortunately, security people at this org tend to have to own whatever initiative is going to happen, even though they don't have any control over the team, the assets, any resources, the sprint timelines, anything like that.
Yep.
Um, so when teams are small, you're either you're operational or you're tactical, or sometimes your management wants to pull you into a monthly business review, and you're now operational and strategic. So what can I said, what can the overall business do to create a good working relationship with security people out of the gate? Making a dashboard is all well and good, except when your org lacks maturity across the board. What are some realistic expectations management, not necessarily security, management should have when a company is small? And I'm thinking about, this is before I learned that your first person, was a compliance person and you hire security people. Um, you know, it, do small organizations often require, and I actually work for a really large organization, but what happens when you try to ask security to do too much and they're failing in expectations? Should management have be given those expectations, or how would I as a security person say, hey management, I don't have access, I should be consulted and informed and not responsible and accountable?
Yeah, I mean that's a really tough one. Again, because like you said, the normal mindset of an earlier stage company is just to ship software as fast as you possibly can.
Right.
And being a security person in that kind of product that doesn't understand the value of security, doesn't understand why why that approach might not work, doesn't really know why they hired a security person in the first place other than to make their auditor happy.
Yeah.
Um, that's going to be tough sledding no matter what you say to management. Um,
Yeah.
you know, the one approach that I think can work in that situation is storytelling.
Hmm.
Helping management see how you want the organization to work. Helping management see what you think a productive relationship between engineering and security is versus what they're asking you to do. You're asking me to produce scans and put vulnerability reports in front of engineering and look at our vulnerability scanner and see what's popping up there. Um, I can do that, but this team is not incentivized to do anything about the work that I'm presenting.
Right.
And I'm not asking you for power to make them do anything. That's not what I want. I don't want power in this situation. I want you to change their incentives to help make this more of an organizational priority.
Right.
I would like to. My dream is to come in at the very start of a development initiative and brainstorm with the team about how we can make a feature that they're getting ready to build more secure. That's what I really want.
Right.
Um, and so, just painting that picture on an ongoing basis, and it does take a long time if you're working with somebody that's not seen that before or hasn't built that way before, it can take a long time to help them understand that and help them understand the importance of it.
Right.
And it may never work. It may never be something that if the organization from the top is not incentivized to build secure software, um, you may never get it across to them.
Mm. Yeah, we've had a lot of layoffs in the tech sector, mostly not security. I've seen only a handful of folks have to deal with security, and
Yeah.
it's an unfortunate fact of life that a lot of development people, unfortunately, are going away, but or looking for new opportunities in this case.
Yeah.
And I've yeah, just in the last 6 months, um how is that a bad thing? Having I know that well, layoffs are a bad thing, yes, but does that mean that there are other opportunities out there for folks to maybe they weren't happy where they were, and this was a you know an incentive for them? Because the first thing I thought of when heard the layoffs was I was like, we're gonna have a lot of new startups because somebody out there has an idea, and it's like now they have the incentive to go and move those things. They're gonna move the needle in a different direction, to use the vernacular. So
Yeah.
my thought was a positive from this is going to be we're going to see some new technologies. We're going to see people who maybe from the Amazons and the Metas and the stuff of the world. They're going to take their their little tickle that they've had in the back of their brain, and they're going to go and take their RSUs and cash them in and make a startup.
Yeah.
Um, it how do you see the latest layoffs? Were they necessary, or were they? I mean, was it just, hey, we're going to see a 5% increase in our stock price temporarily because we're looking like we're doing the right thing? From your opinion, what does that look like for you?
So I read an interesting article on this the other day. I'll have to dig it up for you so you can put it in the show notes. But it was around the idea of layoffs being a form of social contagion. So you
Okay,
see, one organization does them in response to an economy that looks like it's starting to go south. Well, suddenly that becomes the trendy thing to do, and a lot of organizations do layoffs. Um, I think it's different on a case by case basis. There are absolutely startups out there that have a valuation that's way too high, and they're not going to be able to raise funding at that valuation. They're not going to survive with their current burn rate, and they do have to do some layoffs in order to preserve runway and continue trying to fight for another day or trying to wait out this market, whatever their approach may be.
right,
So there's absolutely some valid layoffs that are happening out there. But I think there's also a lot that are just people doing it because another big company is doing it. I have a hard time thinking that a company that had 13 billion in profit needed to do layoffs. Maybe
right.
they wanted to look a little bit more efficient. Maybe they wanted um, to lay off some low performers. Um,
Mm.
Maybe they haven't been paying quite enough attention to that aspect of the business and managing people that are not quite pulling their weight by the standards of the organization out of the organization. Um, but by and large, I think a lot of the big company layoffs we're seeing right now are sort of reactionary versus something that business conditions actually demand.
Yeah. Yeah, I know a lot of this happened. There were some people surmising that some of the layoffs at Microsoft and Amazon and Google were Chat GPT is going to revolutionize. We're gonna get rid of all our developers. Chat GPT is gonna rule the world. They said the same thing about security when automation was coming around. All the security
Yep.
is going to go away. Um, and I think there are just some things out there that probably they had a good try at it. I think one of the things I saw was Amazon getting rid of like the drone, one of their
Yeah.
drone segments or their AI or their robotics segment. And that's unfortunate, but it's like you spend enough time on something and you realize it's not a viable product, or
Right.
it's just not going to make it work. So there are some technologies out there, and you know what, those people who are developing those things may have a solution, but they didn't have the wherewithal to make that. So in 5 years, they may go and figure out a better way of doing whatever it is they couldn't do it at
Yeah.
this place, and revolutionize these items. So that gives people the drive or the motivation to make those changes. Um, I want to give you a couple of minutes here. Any closing thoughts or anything you want to ask? I don't want to turn it on the head, but is there anything you'd like to ask me, or is there any other comments you'd like to make about managing up, or what you do? How do you love your job, or whatever?
Um, yeah, it's a great question. Um, I'm curious what you, as a seasoned security professional, what advice would you give me as somebody who's running engineering at a startup? What are
Cool.
what are the things from a security perspective that you would tell me you guess I'm not paying enough attention to?
Oh, okay. Whew. All right. Well, I think from a startup point of view, and this obviously doesn't apply to your team. I think there needs to be more like what would go wrong if we did this. There are companies out there that is like, let's Lady P, Hush, Lady P. She said Nicholas comes back swinging. I she's my heckler, but it's okay. Yeah, I think there are a lot of companies that tend to build things without they try to invent a problem to be solved. It's like, what is the problem we're trying to solve? Well, there isn't a problem, and you're trying to invent something to solve that problem.
Yeah.
And I work on something right now that I'm like, I wouldn't use it. It's actually on some of my IoT devices, but I will not enable it. And it's like I don't see the need for it. And there's I can go and buy something that will enable this technology, and I'm like, I don't understand. You've created something that didn't need to be created in some cases. And I I think that there should be more along those lines. And um maybe, some of that's probably marketing, people making shit up for, to get people to do stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's one thing. The other thing I would say is, like you said, more collaboration. There are a lot of silos. I think the larger an organization gets, I don't know why silos create. I would love to see the psychology of the silo. And I don't know if
Yeah.
it's a, you're in our sandbox, get out kind of thing, or is it a, you just don't understand. So we're going to, willfully and mindfully exclude you from these things, or you're slowing down our production velocity. And, that's a problem. And anything that, we have so many, builds we have to get out today, and you're going to cause us to do 5 less. So, you go away, you go over here. I would love for also understand, not everything needs a dashboard. Not everything needs metrics. You can only gather metrics after you're considering a mature process.
Yep.
You can't be in beta and ask for a metrics dashboard, because you don't know what's normal, what isn't normal.
Yep.
uh, you know, uh, Really be careful about having meetings for the sake of meetings. If it and if it takes you 15 hours to create a dashboard or to create a paper for a half hour or an hour meeting, is that really a good use of your people's time?
Yep.
And if you can automate the dashboard, great. But if you're having to write a document or a PowerPoint slideshow and it takes 5 people 15 hours to do something, is that 75 hours worth the hour-long meeting that it took to make that thing, you know? And my thing is that, are you going, use particular, if they give you a report, are you ever going to look at that report again? If you're not ever going to look at that report or refer to it again or give it to your CEO or whoever, why am I making it for you?
Yep. Yep. What's the point?
Right.
There's an awful lot of make work that exists. It kind of gets back to the thing we were talking about earlier about what does a security person do to show that they're doing their job in a highly collaborative organization where they're not producing a ton of reports. There's
Right.
an awful lot of make work that exists in the world just to prove that I'm busy.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's more busy work that I've got to do. Yeah.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, those are some of the things that just in the 2 years that I've been working in my joint, I'm like, you're never going to look at the thing that I'm going to give you. So why am I wasting my time trying to make it 100% good when I can just
Yep.
throw something up there? You're going to have questions anyway. So
Right.
I'm going to give you, I don't want to say bare minimum, but I'm going to give you enough that you're going to be like, I'd like to know more. And
Yeah.
then
The
I'll
value's
ask
in the
questions.
discussion, not the artifact.
Right, exactly, exactly. And yeah, sometimes I've actually made comment to my manager. I was like, "Wow, here's a $500,000 meeting." You know,
Yep.
did 25 people need to be in this meeting for 90 minutes? It's like, is that a good use of our time?
Yeah.
And it's like I could have been spending $400,000 over here doing something else, or we could have bought a company for 350,000. So I would just say, if you're senior leadership or what have you, not everything needs a dashboard. Be mindful of meetings, and not everything, you can only measure so many things. And vanity metrics are definitely a thing that I worry about as well. It's like, oh
Oh
yeah,
boy.
we processed 15 tickets today. Great, I just said yes on 14 of them, and went along. I've actually worked at places like that. They had ticket quotas, like you had to look at so many tickets a day, and I'm like, okay, I did that in like 5 minutes. Now I can stare at the wall for an hour and a half because I just said yes to these things. It's like
Yep.
vanity metrics are not good. And I think security people do that too, because it's like, we can show that we're doing good work because we have this metric that says we can do things. And I'm like, you didn't tell them anything. The metric didn't tell you any. What does it tell you? Is it a good metric? Or is it a bad metric? So those are the things. And I hope that our listeners are, saying yes. And I'm imagining people like going, yeah, tell them or whatever. I hope. But yeah, the holy grail for any security person, especially I think at my range, is you know don't use the metric system. Thank you, Twitch Kens. I like my rod to the hog's head as well. So, but I think our holy grail is to be able to go to a company and start a security organization from the ground up. It's like, oh, it's a startup, and I'm the first security person, and I'm going to go in there and I'm going to change the world. And
Yeah.
they have unrealistic expectations. Management probably has unrealistic expectations. So I think the last bit I would have for the security people doing this kind of stuff and for the management is got to set realistic expectations, and don't expect a unicorn to be found. They're few and far between unless you work at SimOps, I guess. So um,
We try
but
really
yeah,
hard.
very cool.
Yeah, I mean, back to something you said. One other thing that I'll hit on real quick right at the end is we did just publicly launch SIM, where anybody can go to the site and sign up for it. And I bring it up because it kind of gets back to what you said about working on things that don't need to exist. One of the reasons I'm at SIM is I'm pretty convinced it does need to exist in the world because I think it can make the lives of engineers better, by allowing them some agency over the tools that they use to control access to production systems and other tools,
Mm,
and giving them the ability to change those workflows to actually fit the way that they work versus just being layered on from the outside. I think SIM provides this really rich fabric for collaboration between engineers and security people,
nice.
where the engineers can PR the Terraform code that sets up an access workflow, and a security person can go in, look at the Terraform, understand the change, approve the PR, and then it gets deployed, and you've built some common ground in the way that we should manage access to our production systems in the process of shipping that PR.
Nice.
So your audience in particular, I would love to get feedback from a security engineer's perspective, from somebody that looks at security organizations and gating production access on a regular basis. So
Okay.
if anybody out there is interested in kicking the tires, I'd encourage you to go to symops.com, symops.com. Sign up for a trial, and my contact information is going to be in the show notes. I would love any feedback that you have, if you do that.
Awesome. And for those developers who may find themselves in the bread line, are you hiring?
We are not, unfortunately. I wish that we were.
Okay.
Not
Sorry, I
not
didn't
at the
mean to put
moment.
you on the spot there, but
Nope.
if you're looking,
It's all good.
um,
I have friends I would hire in a heartbeat if I had the budget to do it.
oh,
But
very cool.
the whole
Okay.
industry seems to kind of be in the same boat right now, unfortunately.
Mm, yeah. Yep. So you're on N Means Means on Twitter and N Means at ruby.social on Mastodon. And your email is also not in. Oh, good. Yeah, let's not put the email in there. Wait, they can get you on they can get you on Twitter or Mastodon if they
Yep.
need to. But cool.
Mastodon preferred. I'm way more active there than I am on Twitter these days.
Right on. Yeah, me too. Yeah, I do both only because the threat intelligence stuff is still on a good portion of it's still on Twitter. So,
Yep.
um, cool. All right, Nickolas Means, thank you so much for coming on. Appreciate you taking the time. And it's late there, so we'll let you go get some dinner. And yeah, if you ever want to come back on the show, just let me know and we'll get something set up because I love talking to senior management who get it. So it's good to.
I will wear that as a badge of honor. That's not
There you
something that security
go.
people say very lightly. I know. So thanks.
There you
Thanks,
go.
Brian.
Appreciate that. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, thanks for coming on and joining us, and hope you thaw out in Austin and you don't have any more ice storms this year. So
Yeah. Thanks so much, man. Thanks for having me on,
cool.
Brian. It's been a lot of fun.
All right. Thanks a lot. All right. Well, that was it for breaking down security this week on the podcast and the stream. So I want everyone to take care of yourselves and be kind to one another. And as we are fond of saying, take care of yourselves because you're the only you have. And we'll talk to you soon.